The spark of kindness. The faint glow of a desk lamp illuminated the otherwise dim office of Thomas Carter, the principal of Silver Creek High School. It was nearly 7 p.m., and a long school day had ended hours ago. Yet Thomas sat hunched over paperwork, his pen moving swiftly across documents for the district. He adjusted his glasses and sighed, the faint sound of laughter drifting in from the hallway. Curious, Thomas stood and followed the sound. He rounded the corner to find a group of 5 girls sitting cross-legged on the floor near the lockers. They were deep in conversation, their laughter now subdued as one of them whispered something conspiratorial, causing the others to erupt into giggles again. "Ladies," Thomas said gently, leaning against the wall. The girls froze, their faces going pale. Principal Carter, the oldest, a tall girl of about 16, said quickly as she stood, placing herself between him and her sisters, "We didn't mean to be loud. We'll leave." Thomas raised his hands in a calming gesture. "You're not in trouble," he said, his voice soft. "But the janitors have already locked most of the doors. Why are you still here?" The youngest of the group, a girl with wide brown eyes, tugged at her older sister's sleeve, whispering, "Lisa, I'm hungry." Her voice cracked slightly, breaking Thomas's heart. Lisa stiffened but tried to cover her embarrassment. We were finishing up our homework," she said, avoiding his gaze. "We'll go now." Thomas nodded, though he didn't miss the way their movements were slow and hesitant, as though they dreaded walking out into the darkening evening. He watched them leave, their silhouettes small against the sprawling campus beyond the doors. Something about their body language lingered with him. The reluctance, the guarded glances, the weight of responsibility on Lisa's shoulders. The next morning, during a staff meeting, Thomas casually mentioned the group of sisters to Ms. Whittaker, the school counselor. "Ah," she said knowingly, stirring her coffee. "The Johnson girls. Sweet kids. Bright too. They're often here late," Thomas noted. "Any idea why?" Ms. Whittaker hesitated before responding. "It's a sensitive situation, Mr. Carter. They're in the foster system. Their current placement is less than ideal." Thomas frowned. "Less than ideal." Ms. Whittaker sighed, lowering her voice. "Their foster parent, Mrs. Green, only took them in because of the subsidy for keeping all 5 together. She's strict, locks the pantry, restricts heating, you name it. They probably stay here late because it's warmer and safer than home." Thomas' stomach churned. He'd worked with many children over his career, but few cases had ever affected him like this. He couldn't shake the image of Lisa shielding her sisters like a mother. That evening, Thomas made a point of walking the halls again, hoping to catch the girls. Sure enough, he found them in the same spot, huddled around a textbook. "Good evening," he greeted with a smile, holding up a box of granola bars. "I thought you might like a snack." The girls exchanged uncertain glances before Lisa stepped forward, taking the box. "Thank you," she murmured. Thomas sat a few feet away on a bench, watching as they shared the snacks. Over the next week, he continued this routine, bringing sandwiches, juice boxes, and fruit cups. Slowly, the girls grew less wary. One evening, as they packed up to leave, Lisa hesitated, then turned to him. "Why do you care?" she asked bluntly, her voice laced with suspicion. Thomas met her gaze steadily. "Because someone needs to." Lisa didn't respond, but the faintest flicker of trust sparked in her eyes. An unlikely decision. The days grew shorter, and autumn leaves swirled across the playground outside Silver Creek High. Principal Thomas Carter's evening routine remained the same, making his rounds through the empty hallways, ensuring everything was locked and secure. But now, there was an addition to his routine. The Johnson sisters had unofficially become a fixture of the school after hours, their presence both heartwarming and deeply concerning. One evening, as Thomas sat quietly at his desk, Lisa knocked at the open door. She hesitated in the doorway, her younger sisters standing a few feet behind her. "Mr. Carter?" she asked softly. He gestured for her to enter. "Come on in, Lisa. What's on your mind?" Lisa hesitated, then stepped into the office, her posture stiff. We just wanted to say thank you. For everything. The snacks, letting us stay late. She trailed off, unsure how to continue. Thomas smiled warmly. You don't need to thank me. I'm happy to help. Lisa frowned, her expression conflicted. But why? No one else does. Most people act like we're a burden. Her words struck Thomas like a blow. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. You're not a burden, Lisa, he said firmly. You and your sisters are just kids trying to get by. And no one, especially children, should have to carry the weight you're carrying. Lisa's eyes flicked to the floor, her guarded mask slipping for a brief moment. I don't want my sisters to grow up thinking the world is always going to be this hard, she whispered. Thomas felt his throat tighten. He wanted to promise her that things would get better, that their struggles would soon be behind them. But he knew better than to make empty promises. That night, Thomas shared his concerns with his wife, Emily, over dinner. Their home, a modest 2-story house, had always been warm and inviting, but it felt emptier since their own children had left for college. You should have seen the look in her eyes, Thomas said, pushing his plate aside. That girl's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Emily set down her fork and looked at him thoughtfully. You've always had a soft spot for kids in tough situations. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. Thomas smiled, though his expression remained heavy. They're good kids, smart, kind, but the foster system isn't doing them any favors. Emily studied him for a moment before speaking. What are you thinking, Thomas? He hesitated, then took a deep breath. I've been thinking about it all day. What if we fostered them? Emily's eyes widened. All 5 of them. Why not? Thomas said, his voice gaining conviction. We have the space. We have the resources. And most importantly, we have the love to give. Those girls need stability. They need a home. Emily leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. It's not something we can decide on a whim, Thomas. This would change everything. For us, and for them. I know, he said, but I can't stop thinking about them. Lisa told me she doesn't want her sisters to grow up thinking life will always be this hard. We could show them that it doesn't have to be. Emily reached across the table and took his hand. Let's pray on it tonight. And tomorrow, we'll figure out what steps we need to take. The following morning, Thomas met with Ms. Whittaker to discuss the idea. You want to foster the Johnson girls? She asked, her eyebrows shooting up in surprise. Thomas nodded. I know it's a big step, but Emily and I have talked about it, and we're serious. Ms. Whittaker smiled, though her expression was tinged with concern. Thomas, that's an incredible thing to offer. But it won't be easy. You'll need to go through the approval process, home studies, background checks, and there's no guarantee the court will approve it. I understand, he said, but I have to try. Over the next few weeks, Thomas and Emily threw themselves into the process. They met with social workers, completed the necessary paperwork, and made adjustments to their home to meet the state's requirements. Emily turned the guest room into a cozy shared bedroom for the younger girls, complete with bunk beds and cheerful decorations. Lisa, as the oldest, was given a room of her own, a space where she could finally have some privacy. Meanwhile, Thomas continued to build trust with the girls at school. He didn't tell them about his and Emily's plans. He didn't want to give them false hope, but he made sure they knew they had an ally in him. The day of the home visit finally arrived. The social worker, Ms. Rivers, walked through the house with a clipboard, inspecting every corner. She asked questions about Thomas and Emily's parenting philosophies, their financial stability, and their reasons for wanting to foster 5 siblings. It's not about us, Thomas said earnestly. It's about them. They deserve a chance to grow up in a home where they feel safe and loved. Ms. Rivers nodded, her expression neutral but not unkind. It's clear you're committed. I'll do everything I can to expedite the process." Several weeks later, Thomas received the call he'd been waiting for. "Mr. Carter," Ms. Rivers said, her voice warm, "the court has approved your application. You and your wife can begin fostering the Johnson girls immediately." Thomas hung up the phone and turned to Emily, his face breaking into a wide grin. "We did it," he said. "They're coming home." That evening, Thomas called the girls into his office after school. When they arrived, he stood and smiled at them, his heart pounding. "I have something important to tell you," he began. "My wife, Emily, and I have been working on something for a while now. We've decided to become your foster parents, if that's what you want." The room fell silent as the girls stared at him in shock. "Really?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas nodded. "Really?" For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the sisters began to cry, not tears of sadness, but of relief and hope. Lisa was the first to step forward, wrapping her arms tightly around Thomas. "Thank you," she whispered. The other girls followed, and soon Thomas found himself at the center of a group hug. As he held them close, he felt a deep sense of purpose settle in his heart. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the Johnson sisters, but for Thomas and Emily as well. A new beginning. The day the Johnson sisters moved in was gray and overcast, but inside the Carter household, the atmosphere was warm with anticipation. Emily bustled about the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on a homemade lasagna, while Thomas adjusted the framed family photos in the hallway. He'd already added one with the girls from a recent school event, though they didn't know yet. "They're here," Emily called as the sound of a car engine died outside. Thomas opened the door to see the girls stepping hesitantly out of the social worker's car. Lisa held the youngest, Ellie, by the hand, while the middle sisters, Janet, Bethany, and Mary, carried their modest belongings in mismatched duffel bags. Ms. Rivers, the social worker, gave Thomas a warm smile as she opened the car's trunk. "They've been nervous but excited," she whispered. "This will be good for them." Thomas stepped forward, his smile warm but not overwhelming. "Welcome home, girls," he said gently. Lisa hesitated, her usual protective mask firmly in place. "This is really okay?" she asked, scanning his face for any sign of doubt. Thomas nodded. "This is your home now. Come inside and see." The first few hours were a blur of activity. Emily gave the girls a tour of the house, showing them their rooms and pointing out little touches she'd added just for them. Books on the shelves, stuffed animals on the beds, and a small art station in the corner of the shared bedroom for Janet and Bethany. Ellie immediately latched onto the teddy bear sitting on her bed. "It's so soft," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Lisa stood in the doorway of her new room, staring at the bed with its clean white comforter and soft pink throw pillows. "I've never had my own room before," she said quietly. Emily placed a hand on her shoulder. "This space is all yours now. You can decorate it however you like." Lisa nodded, her eyes glistening. "Thank you." Dinner that evening was a lively affair. The dining table, which had often felt too large for just Thomas and Emily, was now filled with chatter and laughter as the girls passed around plates of lasagna, salad, and garlic bread. "This is so good," Bethany said, her voice muffled by a mouthful of garlic bread. Emily chuckled. "Well, I'm glad you like it. There's plenty more where that came from." As the meal progressed, the girls began to relax, their initial nervousness giving way to curiosity and even playful teasing. Janet and Bethany bickered over who got the last piece of garlic bread, while Ellie regaled the table with a story about her favorite teacher at school. Lisa, though quieter than her sisters, smiled as she watched them. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe they might finally be safe. Later that evening, as Emily tucked Ellie into bed, the youngest girl looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are we really staying here?" she asked. "Not just for a little while." Emily knelt by the bed, brushing a strand of hair from Ellie's face. "Yes, sweetheart. This is your home now." Ellie's lips trembled, and she whispered, "I like it here. It feels warm." Emily kissed her forehead. "It's going to stay warm. Sleep well, Ellie." Thomas found Lisa sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkening sky. He joined her, handing her a mug of hot chocolate. "It's a big change," he said after a moment of silence. Lisa nodded. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like maybe this is too good to be true." Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's not too good to be true, Lisa. Emily and I meant what we said. We want you and your sisters here." Lisa turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I'm not used to adults keeping their promises." Thomas felt a pang in his chest, but met her gaze steadily. "I can't change what happened before, but I can promise you this. As long as you're here, you'll have a home where you're loved and supported." Lisa studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll try to believe that." Over the next few weeks, life in the Carter household began to settle into a rhythm. Mornings were a whirlwind of activity as the girls got ready for school, each one vying for space in the bathroom. Evenings were spent at the dining table, where they shared stories about their day and worked on homework. Thomas helped Janet with her science project, while Emily guided Bethany through a particularly tricky math assignment. Lisa took on the role of unofficial tutor for Ellie, patiently helping her with reading comprehension. The girls began to blossom in the stable environment. Janet's artistic talent flourished under Emily's encouragement, and Bethany joined the school's art club. Mary, who had been shy and withdrawn, found her confidence through basketball, earning a spot on the school team. Even Ellie, who had struggled with anxiety, began to laugh more freely. Lisa, however, remained cautious. Though she participated in family activities and took on the role of her sister's protector, she still held part of herself back, as if afraid to fully trust the happiness she was beginning to feel. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room for a movie night, Thomas noticed Lisa sitting slightly apart from the group, her arms wrapped around her knees. During a lull in the movie, he leaned over and whispered, "Everything okay?" Lisa hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, I guess I'm still getting used to this." Thomas smiled. "Take your time. We're not going anywhere." Lisa looked at him, her guard slipping for just a moment. "Thanks, Mr. Carter. You can call me Thomas," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "Or Dad, if you ever feel comfortable." Lisa's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked as though she might cry. Instead, she gave him a small, shy smile. "I'll think about it." Thomas nodded, his heart swelling. "That's all I ask." New beginnings and old wounds. Months passed, and the Johnson sisters settled more deeply into life with the Carters. The transformation in their demeanor was evident. Ellie, who had once been shy and hesitant, now bounded into the house after school with stories of her adventures on the playground. Janet and Bethany's artistic talents flourished, and their works began to line the walls of the Carter home. Mary's newfound confidence on the basketball court earned her the nickname Mighty Mary among her teammates. But Lisa remained the most complex of the sisters. She had taken on the role of a second parent for so long that she often struggled to let go of that responsibility. She insisted on being the first to wake up, preparing breakfast for her younger siblings, even though Emily always offered to take over. One Saturday morning, Thomas found her in the kitchen flipping pancakes while the others slept. "You know, we don't expect you to do this every day," Thomas said gently, leaning against the counter. Lisa didn't look up. "I don't mind. It's just what I've always done." Thomas hesitated. "That may be true, but it doesn't mean you have to carry all the weight anymore. Emily and I are here now." Lisa shrugged. "Old habits, I guess." Thomas wanted to say more, to tell her it was okay to let her guard down, but he knew Lisa needed to come to that realization on her own. So instead, he simply said, "Well, you make a mean pancake. Save me one, will you?" Lisa smiled faintly, but her shoulders remained tense. The shadow of the past. The adjustment wasn't without its challenges. The girls had come from a world of scarcity and instability, and the scars from their past often manifested in small, unexpected ways. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Ellie spilled her glass of milk. The sound of the glass hitting the table was enough to make her freeze in place, her small hands trembling as she waited for the inevitable scolding. "I'm sorry," she blurted, her voice panicked. "I'll clean it up. Please don't." Emily interrupted, her tone calm and soothing. "It's just milk. Accidents happen." Ellie stared at her, unsure how to respond. Emily gently wiped the table and handed Ellie another glass of milk. "See, all fixed." The little girl's lip quivered as she whispered, "You're not mad." Emily pulled Ellie into a hug. "Of course not, sweetheart. It's just a spill. Nothing to worry about." Watching from across the table, Lisa's jaw tightened. She didn't say anything, but later that evening, Thomas found her sitting alone on the back porch. "It's hard to believe this is real sometimes," she admitted, staring out into the dark yard. "When you grow up being punished for every little thing, it's hard to trust that kindness won't come with strings attached." Thomas sat beside her, his voice steady. "Kindness doesn't come with strings here, Lisa. It's not something you have to earn. It's something you deserve. Something all of you deserve." Lisa didn't respond, but she leaned slightly against him. And for Thomas, that small gesture spoke volumes. A community divided. The decision to foster the Johnson sisters hadn't been without controversy. Some members of the school board questioned whether it was appropriate for a principal to foster students from his own school, citing potential conflicts of interest. At the next school board meeting, Mrs. Patterson, a vocal board member, raised her concerns. "Mr. Carter, while I commend your generosity, don't you think this situation creates a professional conflict? How can you remain impartial in disciplinary matters involving your foster children?" Thomas remained calm, though the question stung. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Patterson. However, my role as a principal doesn't change my ability to provide a fair and supportive environment for all students. My commitment to this community and to the students hasn't wavered, and I can assure you that I approach my responsibilities with the same integrity as always." Ms. Whittaker, the school counselor, stood up to speak. "I've worked with Principal Carter for years, and I can personally attest to his professionalism and dedication. If anything, his decision to foster these girls is a testament to his character, not a detriment to it." The room murmured in agreement, though a few skeptics remained. Thomas knew winning over the entire community would take time, but he was determined to show through his actions that his heart was in the right place. Unlikely allies. One of the most surprising turns came from a parent who had once been one of Thomas's harshest critics. Mr. Daniels. His son, Avon, had been a classmate of Mary's and had often been vocal about his doubts regarding the Carters' decision to foster the girls. But when Avon joined the basketball team and began spending more time with Mary, Mr. Daniels' attitude began to shift. At a school fundraiser, Mr. Daniels approached Thomas. "I owe you an apology," he said, his tone sincere. "I had my doubts about your decision, but my son speaks so highly of Mary. He says she's the hardest worker on the team and a great leader. It's clear you and your wife are doing something right." Thomas smiled, extending his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. That means a lot." A glimmer of hope. The girls' progress became increasingly evident as the months turned into a year. Janet won an art competition, her watercolor painting of her sisters hanging proudly in the local library. Bethany started a baking club at school, impressing her peers with her intricate cupcakes. Ellie overcame her fear of speaking in class, earning a gold star from her teacher for her first oral presentation. Even Lisa began to let her guard down. She joined the debate team and excelled, her sharp mind and eloquence earning her respect from her peers and coaches alike. But the most heartwarming moment came one evening when the family was gathered for a game of Scrabble. As they laughed and teased each other over silly words, Lisa suddenly spoke up. "Thomas," she began, her voice hesitant. "I mean, Dad, thank you for all of this." The room fell silent for a moment before Thomas grinned. "You're welcome, Lisa, and thank you for letting us be a part of your lives." The family returned to their game, but the moment lingered in Thomas's heart long after the tiles had been packed away. Healing together. As the Carter household flourished with warmth and activity, challenges continued to surface, reminders of the long road the Johnson sisters had traveled. The family faced them together, building a foundation of trust and love, one day at a time. A night of shadows. One stormy night, thunder boomed overhead, shaking the windows of the Carter home. Thomas had just settled in his armchair with a book when he heard a muffled cry from the upstairs hallway. Setting the book aside, he climbed the stairs to find Ellie standing outside Lisa's room, clutching her blanket. Her wide eyes shimmered with tears. "Ellie, what's wrong?" Thomas asked gently, kneeling to her level. I heard something," she whispered. "It was so loud, and I thought." Her voice broke as she trailed off. Thomas immediately understood. The storm had likely triggered a memory of the sisters' past, a time when loud noises might have meant danger, not just thunder. "Come here," Thomas said, scooping her up into his arms. He carried her back to her room and sat with her until her breathing steadied. As he tucked her back into bed, Ellie asked softly, "Do you think Lisa's scared too?" Thomas hesitated, knowing Lisa's habit of burying her feelings. "Maybe," he admitted, "but she's also strong, just like you." Ellie nodded, her small hands gripping the edge of her blanket. "I'm glad we're here. It's not scary like before." Thomas kissed her forehead, his heart heavy with both gratitude and sorrow. "You're safe now, Ellie. Always." Lisa's walls began to crack. Though Lisa had started calling Thomas Dad, in quiet moments, her sense of responsibility for her sisters remained a barrier. She often sacrificed her own needs to ensure their happiness, throwing herself into academics and extracurricular activities, while quietly shying away from personal connections. Emily noticed this one evening as she prepared dinner. Lisa was sitting at the kitchen table, poring over her debate notes, while Ellie and Bethany played a board game nearby. "You know," Emily began, placing a bowl of fruit on the table, "you don't always have to be the one taking care of everyone." Lisa looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" Emily smiled gently. "I mean it's okay to let us help. You've been carrying your sisters for so long, Lisa, but you don't have to do that alone anymore." Lisa hesitated, her hands tightening around her pencil. I don't want them to feel like I'm letting them down." "You could never let them down," Emily said, sitting across from her. "You're an incredible sister, but you're also still a teenager. It's okay to take time for yourself." Lisa looked at her stepmother, her guarded expression softening. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice tentative but sincere. Facing criticism at school. Despite the progress the Johnson sisters made, whispers and judgment from certain corners of the school community lingered. One afternoon, Lisa overheard a group of students in the hallway. "Did you hear about Lisa? The principal's her foster dad now," one girl said, her tone tinged with mockery. "Think she gets special treatment." Lisa's hands clenched into fists, but before she could confront them, Mary appeared beside her. "Ignore them," Mary said quietly. "They don't know anything." Lisa exhaled slowly, her anger giving way to frustration. "I just wish people would stop assuming we're different." "You know what Dad says," Mary said with a smirk. "People who assume don't know the full story." She grinned, nudging Lisa with her elbow. "Let's go. I've got practice, and you've got a debate to crush." Lisa smiled despite herself. "You're right. Let's go." A standout debate. That evening, Lisa competed in a regional debate tournament. The topic, whether community programs could truly bridge socioeconomic divides, hit close to home. As she spoke, her passion and conviction silenced the room. Community isn't just about proximity, Lisa said, her voice steady. It's about stepping up for each other, especially when times are hard. I've seen firsthand how a little kindness and support can change lives. Her words carried the weight of her own experience, and when the judges announced her team as the winners, Lisa felt a surge of pride, not just for the victory, but for the courage it had taken to share a piece of her story. Afterward, Thomas and Emily waited outside the auditorium with the younger girls. As Lisa emerged, her trophy in hand, Thomas beamed. "We knew you'd crush it." Lisa smiled, her cheeks flushed. "Thanks, Dad." A community event. Inspired by the sisters' progress, Thomas and Emily decided to host a community event at the school. A family night filled with games, food, and activities. The goal was to foster connections and raise funds for underprivileged students. The event was a resounding success. Janet and Bethany displayed their artwork in the gym, while Ellie volunteered at the face painting station. Mary and her basketball team ran a free throw contest, and Lisa helped Thomas with a speech about the importance of supporting families in need. "None of us can do this alone," Thomas said, addressing the crowd. "But together, we can build a community where every child feels valued and supported." The audience erupted in applause, and afterward, several parents approached Thomas to thank him. Even some of his former critics admitted they'd underestimated the impact of his decision to foster the Johnson sisters. A letter from the past. One quiet afternoon, as Lisa organized some of her old belongings, she found a crumpled envelope buried at the bottom of a box. It was a letter from their biological mother, written shortly before her passing. Lisa hesitated before unfolding the letter, her hands trembling. The words were brief but heartfelt, expressing love and hope for the future. "No matter what happens," the letter read, "you are stronger than you know. Take care of each other." Tears blurred Lisa's vision as she read the final lines. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small box on her desk. Later that evening, she shared it with her sisters during their usual family game night. The letter brought tears and hugs, but it also reminded them of the strength they had inherited from their mother. The first family photo. The following weekend, Emily surprised the family with a trip to a local park for a professional photo session. The girls laughed and posed against the backdrop of autumn leaves, their smiles brighter than ever. As the photographer captured their group hug, Thomas thought of how far they had come. Each of the girls, once guarded and hesitant, now radiated joy and hope. This was their family, not defined by blood, but by love and resilience, trials and triumphs. The Johnson sisters had become fully integrated into the Carter family, and life in their home was lively and full. Yet with growth came challenges, new obstacles that tested their resilience and the bonds they'd formed with Thomas and Emily. The call from the past. It started with a letter delivered to the Carter home on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. The envelope was addressed to the guardians of the Johnson sisters. Emily opened it at the kitchen counter, her hand steady, but her heart uneasy. Inside was a notice from the Department of Child Services. Mrs. Green, the sisters' previous foster parent, had filed a formal request to regain custody. Emily's breath caught as she read further. Mrs. Green claimed that her home was now suitable for children and that her financial situation had improved. Despite the stability the Carters had provided, the caseworker would need to investigate. When Thomas arrived home that evening, Emily handed him the letter, her face pale. "What do we do, Thomas?" she asked. "This can't happen. Not after everything the girls have been through." Thomas read the letter carefully, his jaw tightening. "We'll fight it," he said firmly. "We've worked too hard to give those girls a real home. We're not letting them go back to her." The sisters find out. The next morning, Thomas and Emily sat the sisters down to explain the situation. Lisa, as always, immediately stepped into a protective role. "She can't take us back," Lisa said, her voice sharp. "We're finally happy here." Ellie clung to Emily's side, her eyes wide with fear. "Do we have to leave?" "No," Thomas said quickly, his voice calm and reassuring. This letter doesn't mean anything is going to change, but the system has to follow the rules, so a caseworker will come to evaluate both homes. What can we do? Janet asked, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Emily smiled gently. Just keep being yourselves. We'll handle the rest. The investigation. The following week, the caseworker, Miss Hargrove, visited the Carter home. She was polite but meticulous, inspecting every corner of the house and asking detailed questions about the girls' daily routines. How do you ensure the girls maintain their individual identities while functioning as a unit? Ms. Hargrove asked as she jotted down notes. Emily, sitting beside Thomas in the living room, answered smoothly. We encourage each of them to pursue their own interests. Janet and Bethany have their art. Mary has basketball, and Lisa excels at debate. At the same time, we emphasize family activities to strengthen their bond. After spending an hour with Thomas and Emily, Ms. Hargrove interviewed each of the sisters individually. Lisa's interview was the longest. When she emerged from the study, her expression was unreadable. She asked a lot about Mrs. Green. Lisa said later, her voice low. I told her the truth. The shadow of Mrs. Green. Though the Carters tried to shield the girls from the details of the case, news about Mrs. Green's renewed efforts spread through the school. Whispers and gossip followed the sisters in the hallways, and Lisa, in particular, struggled to keep her frustration in check. One day, during lunch, a classmate approached her with a smug expression. I heard you're going back to your old foster home. Guess the principal doesn't want you after all. Lisa's fists clenched, but before she could respond, Mary stepped in, her voice firm. Leave her alone. The classmate shrugged and walked away, but the encounter left Lisa shaken. That evening, she grunted to Thomas. Why do people have to be so cruel? She asked, pacing the living room. Why do they think it's okay to judge us? Thomas watched her with understanding. People fear what they don't understand, Lisa, but you've shown time and time again how strong you are. Don't let their words define you. Lisa stopped pacing, her eyes glistening. I'm trying. It's just hard. Thomas stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do it alone. We're all here for you. An unexpected ally. As the case dragged on, the Carters found support in an unexpected place. Mrs. Green's former neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell. She showed up at the school one afternoon, asking to speak with Thomas. I heard what's happening, Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice hushed but urgent. I lived next door to Mrs. Green for years. I've seen how she treated those girls. Thomas leaned forward, his interest piqued. Would you be willing to speak to the caseworker? Mrs. Caldwell nodded. I'll do whatever I can. Those girls deserve better. The courtroom showdown. The day of the custody hearing arrived. The courtroom was small and formal, with rows of wooden benches and a judge presiding over the proceedings. The sisters sat with Thomas and Emily, their faces a mix of determination and fear. Mrs. Green's lawyer painted her as a reformed woman who had made mistakes but was now ready to provide a stable home. However, when Mrs. Caldwell took the stand, her testimony painted a different picture. She locked the pantry and kept the house freezing. Mrs. Caldwell said, Those girls came to my house hungry more than once. She only took them in for the subsidy. The turning point came when Lisa was called to testify. Standing tall, she spoke with quiet strength. We've finally found a home where we feel safe, Lisa said, her voice steady. Thomas and Emily Carter have given us more love and support in a year than we ever had before. My sisters and I want to stay with them. A victory for the family. After hours of deliberation, the judge rendered a decision. Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the Carter household provides the stability and nurturing environment these children need. Custody will remain with the Carters. The courtroom erupted in quiet cheers. Lisa hugged her sisters tightly, relief washing over her face. A celebration of home. That evening, the Carters hosted a celebration dinner. Friends, neighbors, and even school staff came to show their support. The dining table was piled high with dishes, and laughter filled the house. During the meal, Thomas stood to make a toast. "This isn't just about winning custody," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's about family. A family that's stronger together, no matter what challenges come our way." Lisa raised her glass, her smile brighter than it had ever been. "To family," she said, "and to finding our forever home." The room echoed with the sound of glasses clinking, a testament to the love and resilience that had brought them all together. Building bridges. With the custody battle behind them, the Carter family felt a new sense of security. The tension that had lingered in their home for months slowly lifted, replaced by laughter, shared meals, and moments of quiet joy. But life had not completely settled. Challenges still loomed, not only for the sisters, but also for the community around them. Lisa's leadership. Lisa had always been the natural leader of her sisters, but now, with the legal battles resolved, she began to turn her focus outward. At school, she noticed other students who, like her and her sisters, carried invisible burdens. One day, during a student council meeting, Lisa proposed an idea. "We should start a peer mentorship program," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "There are so many kids here who don't feel like they belong, or who are going through things they can't talk about. We could pair them with older students who understand." The room went silent for a moment before the student body president spoke up. "That's actually a great idea. It could really help people." Encouraged by the positive response, Lisa threw herself into the project. She recruited volunteers, coordinated training sessions, and worked with the school counselor to identify students who might benefit from the program. The mentorship program launched a month later, and the results were immediate. Students who had been withdrawn and struggling began to open up. Lisa's initiative quickly gained attention from teachers and administrators, who praised her for creating a space where students could feel seen and heard. At home, Thomas and Emily couldn't hide their pride. "You're making a real difference, Lisa," Emily said one evening as they prepared dinner together. Lisa smiled, her confidence growing. "It feels good to help. It reminds me of how far we've come." Bethany's big dream. While Lisa was busy with her mentorship program, Bethany was quietly working on a dream of her own. Inspired by her love of baking and the sense of comfort it brought her, she decided to start a small home bakery. "Are you sure about this?" Janet teased as Bethany spread flour across the counter one Saturday morning. "Your cupcakes are great, but running a business is a lot of work." Bethany grinned. "I'm not just making cupcakes, Janet. I want to bake things that make people happy, that remind them of home. Besides, I've already got my first customer." Emily walked into the kitchen carrying an order form from a local coffee shop. "They want to test your pastries for their menu," she said, smiling proudly. Bethany's jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" Thomas, who was sitting at the dining table, chuckled. "Looks like you've got a business to run, kiddo." Over the next few weeks, Bethany juggled schoolwork and baking, often staying up late to perfect her recipes. Her sisters pitched in, helping her package orders and deliver them around town. The bakery, which she called Beth's Comfort Bakes, quickly gained a following, and soon she was receiving orders faster than she could fill them. One evening, as she pulled a tray of cookies from the oven, she looked at her family and said, "I never thought I could do something like this, but you all believed in me. Thank you." Janet's breakthrough. Janet had always been the quiet, introspective one, often lost in her sketchbooks and paintbrushes. But when her art teacher encouraged her to enter a statewide competition, she hesitated. "What if I don't win?" Janet asked one evening as she worked on a painting in the living room. Thomas knelt beside her, studying the vibrant colors on the canvas. "Winning isn't the point, Janet. Putting yourself out there, sharing your talent with the world. That's what matters." Janet nodded, though her doubt lingered. Still, she submitted her entry, a stunning portrait of her sisters standing together, their faces illuminated by soft sunlight. The piece, titled Strength in Unity, was deeply personal, capturing not just her family's bond, but also their resilience. Weeks later, Janet received a letter in the mail. She'd won first place. The announcement came with an invitation to showcase her work at a prestigious gallery in the city. As her family gathered to celebrate, Janet said, "I didn't think I could do this, but now I know that art can tell stories, our stories." Ellie's stage debut. Ellie, the youngest of the sisters, had always been shy and reserved. But when her teacher suggested she audition for the school play, something inside her sparked. "I don't know if I can do it," Ellie said nervously as she sat on Emily's lap one evening. "What if I mess up?" Emily hugged her tightly. "You've got this, sweetheart. Just think of it as telling a story. And you're a great storyteller." Ellie took the advice to heart and auditioned for the role of a spunky young girl in a heartwarming comedy. To her surprise, she got the part. Rehearsals were grueling, but Ellie worked hard, memorizing her lines and practicing her delivery. On opening night, as the curtains rose and the audience filled the auditorium, she took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. Her performance was a hit. When the play ended, the crowd erupted into applause, and Ellie's face lit up with pride. "That was amazing," Mary exclaimed, hugging her sister tightly after the show. Ellie beamed. "It was fun. I think I'd want to do more plays." A community united. Inspired by their daughter's accomplishments, Thomas and Emily decided to host a community open house of the school. The event, called Silver Creek Celebration of Dreams, showcased the sisters' talents alongside those of other students. Lisa spoke about the mentorship program. Bethany set up a booth with her baked goods. Janet displayed her award-winning painting, and Ellie performed a monologue from her play. The turnout was overwhelming. Families, teachers, and local leaders filled the school gym, sharing stories, sampling Bethany's treats, and marveling at the art and performances. As Thomas stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. "This is what community looks like," he said, his voice steady. "It's about lifting each other up, celebrating our triumphs, and supporting one another through challenges." A new chapter. As the evening wound down and the family returned home, they gathered in the living room to reflect on the day. Ellie curled up on the couch, still wearing her stage makeup, while Janet and Bethany recounted their favorite moments. Lisa, sitting beside Thomas, leaned over and whispered, "I never thought life could feel like this, like we're all moving forward together." Thomas smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "You've all worked so hard to get here, and this is just the beginning." Emily raised a glass of sparkling cider. "To family," she said, "and to all the dreams still waiting for us." The sisters raised their glasses, their faces glowing with hope and joy. For the first time in years, they felt not just like survivors, but like a family united by love, ready to face whatever came next, turning adversity into opportunity. As the Carter family's bond grew stronger, new opportunities and challenges began to reshape their lives. The sisters found themselves not only thriving in their individual pursuits, but also discovering ways to uplift others in the process. A challenge for Lisa. Lisa's mentorship program had been a resounding success, but the demands of running it while balancing her studies began to weigh heavily on her. The program had expanded rapidly, with dozens of students signing up for mentorship. With the increased participation came logistical hurdles, scheduling meetings, coordinating training sessions, and handling conflicts between mentors and mentees. One evening, as Lisa sat at the dining room table, her notes and spreadsheets spread out before her, Emily placed a warm cup of tea next to her. "You've been at this for hours," Emily said gently. "Why don't you take a break?" "I can't," Lisa replied, rubbing her temples. "There's so much to do, and if I mess this up, people will stop trusting the program." Emily pulled up a chair. "Lisa, you're doing something amazing, but you can't do it alone. Have you thought about delegating some of these tasks?" Lisa hesitated. "I don't know if anyone else will care as much as I do." Emily smiled. "Caring isn't the problem. You just have to trust others to step up. Leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about empowering others. Taking Emily's advice to heart, Lisa formed a small team of student leaders to help manage the program. To her surprise, many of them brought fresh ideas and new energy, making the program even more effective. By the end of the semester, the mentorship initiative was being recognized as a model for other schools in the district. At the school assembly where Lisa was honored for her work, she stood on stage, looking out at the students who had benefited from the program. "This isn't just about me," she said in her speech. "It's about what we can do when we come together to lift each other up." Bethany expands her horizons. Bethany's small home bakery had grown steadily, and she found herself juggling more orders than she could handle alone. One day, after delivering a batch of cupcakes to the local coffee shop, the owner approached her. "Bethany," he said, "have you ever thought about opening your own space? Your treats fly off the shelves faster than we can restock them." Bethany blinked, caught off guard. "My own space? That's a lot." "It is," he admitted, "but I know a spot downtown that's available, and I think it could be perfect for you." Excited but nervous, Bethany shared the idea with her family that evening. "What if I can't do it?" she asked, her hands wringing nervously. Thomas leaned back in his chair, smiling. "Bethany, you've built something incredible already. Opening a shop is just the next step." With the family's support, Bethany took the leap. She worked tirelessly to renovate the small storefront, painting the walls in soft pastels and designing a cozy seating area. She named the shop Beth's Comfort Kitchen and held a grand opening event that drew a crowd of friends, family, and local supporters. The shop quickly became a community favorite, not just for its baked goods, but also for its warm atmosphere. Bethany started hiring local teens, many of whom were part of Lisa's mentorship program, giving them valuable work experience. One evening, as Bethany locked up the shop, she looked at the sign above the door and smiled. "I never thought I could do this," she whispered to herself. "But here I am." Janet's new platform. After winning the statewide art competition, Janet's confidence soared. She began to use her art as a platform for advocacy, creating pieces that addressed social issues like foster care reform and mental health awareness. One of her most powerful works was a mural she painted on the side of a community center. The mural depicted a large tree with deep roots, each branch labeled with words like hope, resilience, and unity. Around the tree, she painted silhouettes of children and families, their hands raised as if supporting the branches. When the mural was unveiled, a crowd gathered to admire it. Local news outlets covered the event, and Janet was invited to speak about her inspiration. "This tree represents the strength of community," she said. "It reminds us that no matter where we come from or what we've been through, we can grow and thrive when we're supported." The mural became a symbol of the town's resilience, and Janet's work was featured in an exhibit at a nearby university. Professors and students alike praised her ability to tell powerful stories through her art. Mary's graduation. While her sisters were making strides in their respective fields, Mary was preparing for a milestone of her own, graduating high school. As the family gathered to watch her walk across the stage, Thomas and Emily couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with pride. Mary had faced her own struggles, from finding her place in the basketball team to overcoming the lingering doubts about her abilities. But she had risen above them, earning not only academic honors, but also a scholarship to a prestigious sports academy. During her graduation speech, Mary looked out at the crowd, her voice steady and confident. "I've learned that success isn't about how you start. It's about how you keep moving forward, no matter what obstacles come your way. I'm standing here today because of the people who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." The audience erupted into applause, and Mary's teammates gave her a standing ovation. Ellie's brave step. Ellie's newfound confidence from her school play led her to audition for a regional theater production. To her surprise, she landed a small but important role. The experience was transformative, teaching her not only about performance, but also about teamwork and perseverance. On the night of the final performance, Ellie stood backstage, her heart pounding. As the curtain rose and she stepped into the spotlight, she felt a surge of pride. The audience's applause at the end of the show was thunderous, and as she took her bow, she spotted her family in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. The Carter family legacy. By the end of the year, the Carter family had become a beacon of hope in the community. Thomas and Emily's decision to foster the Johnson sisters had not only changed their lives, but also inspired others to step up and make a difference. One evening, as the family gathered around the dining table for dinner, Thomas raised a glass. "I want to say how proud I am of each of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've taken every challenge life has thrown at you and turned it into an opportunity to grow. You're not just survivors, you're leaders." The sisters clinked their glasses together, their faces glowing with pride and love. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned to dreams for the future. Lisa talked about her plans to expand the mentorship program to other schools. Bethany shared ideas for new recipes. Janet discussed her upcoming art projects. Mary spoke excitedly about her sports academy, and Ellie hinted at her next audition. Thomas and Emily listened, their hearts full. This was their family, not perfect, not traditional, but strong, resilient, and bound by love. Legacies of change. Years passed, and the Carter family grew in both achievements and influence. The sisters had come a long way from the frightened, uncertain girls who had once lingered in the school hallways. Each of them had embraced her own path, and together, they began creating legacies that would inspire others for generations. Lisa's movement. Lisa's mentorship program had grown into a countywide initiative. Now called Guiding Stars, the program paired at-risk youth with mentors who provided emotional support, career guidance, and academic assistance. Lisa, now in her mid-20s and working as a community outreach coordinator, often traveled to schools to speak about the importance of fostering connections. One day, she received an email from a school district across the state, asking her to help implement Guiding Stars in their schools. The email brought tears to her eyes as she read the closing lines. "Your story and your program have transformed our understanding of how we can help students succeed. We'd be honored to work with you." At home that evening, Lisa shared the news with her family. "It's like everything we went through is finally making sense," she said. "All the struggles, all the pain, it's led to this." Thomas nodded, his pride evident. "You're not just making sense of it, Lisa. You're turning it into something beautiful." Lisa smiled. "It's all because of you and Mom. You showed us what love and kindness can do." Bethany's culinary empire. Bethany's bakery had evolved into a thriving business. Beth's Comfort Kitchen had expanded to 3 locations, each with the same cozy atmosphere and signature baked goods. Bethany had also started offering baking workshops for underprivileged youth, teaching them not only how to bake, but also how to manage a small business. One Saturday, as she finished a workshop with a group of teens, one of them approached her hesitantly. "Miss Bethany," the girl said, clutching a notebook, "I just wanted to say thank you. I never thought I'd be good at anything, but you helped me believe I could do something with my life." Bethany knelt to the girl's level, her heart full. "You're already amazing," she said. "I just helped you see it." Later that night, Bethany reflected on how far she'd come. She thought about the early days when baking had been her escape from the chaos of her childhood. Now it was her way of giving back. She smiled as she glanced at the family photo on her desk. "We really did it, didn't we, Mary?" she whispered. Janet's artistic voice. Janet had become a sought-after artist, known for her evocative murals and thought-provoking exhibitions. Her work often centered on themes of resilience and community, and she had gained international recognition for a piece titled Roots Unbroken, which depicted a family tree growing out of rocky soil, its branches intertwined with golden light. Her success had led to an invitation to create a mural in a major metropolitan city, and Janet spent weeks sketching designs. When the mural was unveiled, it covered the side of a towering building. Its vibrant colors and intricate details drawing crowds from across the city. During the unveiling ceremony, Janet spoke to the gathered crowd. "This mural is a tribute to the people who believe in us when we're struggling to believe in ourselves," she said. "It's about how love and support can turn even the harshest soil into something beautiful." The audience erupted in applause, and Janet felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything she'd ever known. Mary's leadership in law enforcement. Mary had followed her dream of becoming a police officer, but she wasn't content to simply enforce the law. She wanted to change it. After completing her training and earning promotions, she became a community liaison officer, focusing on building trust between law enforcement and the neighborhoods they served. Her initiatives included conflict resolution workshops, community patrol programs, and youth engagement events. Mary often spoke about her own experiences as a foster child, using her story to bridge the gap between officers and residents. One evening during a town hall meeting, an elderly woman stood up and said, "Officer Mary, you've changed how we see the police. You've given us hope." Mary nodded, her voice steady as she replied, "That hope goes both ways. You've shown me how powerful a united community can be." At home, Mary often visited her family, sharing stories of the people she'd helped. "It's like we're still carrying that torch Mary wanted us to carry," she told her sisters one evening. "We're still making a difference." Ellie's rising star. Ellie's passion for theater had blossomed into a career. She had landed roles in several regional productions before making her Broadway debut in a critically acclaimed play. Her performances were lauded for their emotional depth, and she quickly became a rising star in the theater world. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, Ellie received a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. As she stood on stage, taking her bows, she thought of the family who had supported her through every step of her journey. Later that night, she called Thomas and Emily. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me the confidence to dream." "We always knew you'd shine, Ellie," Thomas replied. "And you're just getting started." A family reunion. Years later, the Carters decided to host a family reunion, inviting friends, neighbors, and extended relatives to their home. The sisters, now scattered across different cities and careers, returned to the house that had given them their start. As the sun set on the day of the reunion, the family gathered around the dining table, just as they had so many times before. Bethany had baked a special cake, decorated with images of a tree and 5 stars, one for each of the sisters. Lisa raised her glass, her voice filled with emotion. "To Mom and Dad," she said, "for believing in us, for fighting for us, and for showing us what family truly means." Thomas and Emily exchanged a look, their hearts full. "And to all of you," Thomas replied, "for proving that love and resilience can overcome anything." As the family clinked their glasses and laughed together, the house seemed to glow with the warmth of their shared memories. They had not only survived, they had flourished, turning their pain into purpose and creating legacies that would endure for generations. Full circle. Years turned into decades, and the Carter family's legacy of love and resilience continued to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond what any of them could have imagined. The sisters, now women in their own right, carried with them the lessons they had learned in the warmth and safety of the Carter home. This chapter brings the story to its culmination, a celebration of a family that had faced the impossible and triumphed. The anniversary. The year marked 30 years since Thomas and Emily had welcomed the Johnson sisters into their home. The family decided to hold a grand celebration at the very school where it all began, Silver Creek High. The event was a testament to how much their lives, and the lives of those around them, had been transformed. The gymnasium was decorated with strings of lights and photographs chronicling the family's journey. A timeline stretched across one wall, starting with the first photo of the girls in their new home, and ending with snapshots of their current lives. Guests poured in, friends, neighbors, former classmates, teachers, and even people who had once doubted Thomas's decision to foster the sisters. Each of them had, in some way, been touched by the family story. Lisa, now the director of a national nonprofit inspired by her mentorship program, stood near the entrance, greeting guests with a radiant smile. Bethany managed the catering, providing a spread of baked goods that included her now famous cupcakes. Janet had created a special art installation for the event, while Mary and Ellie were busy rehearsing their parts in a surprise tribute performance. Thomas's reflection. As the celebration unfolded, Thomas found a quiet moment to himself, standing at the edge of the gym and taking it all in. He marveled at how far his daughters had come. Lisa, the visionary leader; Bethany, the entrepreneurial powerhouse; Janet, the renowned artist; Mary, the courageous reformer; and Ellie, the celebrated actress. Emily joined him, slipping her hand into his. "You're thinking about the beginning, aren't you?" she asked. Thomas nodded, his eyes glistening. "I never imagined this," he admitted. "All I wanted was to give them a chance. And look at what they've done with it." Emily smiled. "They've given back tenfold. And it all started with you believing in them." Thomas shook his head. "It started with us. We did this together." The tribute. As the evening reached its peak, Lisa took the stage. She adjusted the microphone, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began. "This isn't just a celebration of our family. It's a celebration of community, of what happens when people come together to lift each other up." She paused, scanning the room. 30 years ago, 5 scared girls found a home. We didn't just find shelter. We found love, safety, and the belief that we could be more than our circumstances. Mom and Dad, you gave us everything. And tonight, we want to honor you. The lights dimmed, and a montage of photos and videos played on a large screen, showing moments from the family's life. Birthdays, graduations, holidays, and quiet evenings at home. The audience watched in rapt attention, many dabbing their eyes as the story unfolded. When the lights came back on, Mary and Ellie stepped onto the stage, dressed in matching outfits. Together, they performed a spoken-word piece they had written, recounting their journey from despair to hope. Their words were raw and powerful, capturing the depth of their gratitude and the strength they had found in each other. By the time they finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Janet's gift. After the performance, Janet unveiled her art installation, a towering sculpture of a tree, its branches intertwined with images of the sisters' accomplishments and the faces of the people they had helped over the years. "This tree represents our family," Janet explained to the crowd. "Its roots are the love and sacrifices of Mom and Dad. Its branches are the lives we've touched. And its leaves are the dreams we're still chasing." Thomas and Emily stood in awe as the audience erupted into applause. Janet hugged them both tightly. "This is for you," she whispered. "The next generation." As the night wore on, the sisters gathered in a quiet corner of the gym, reminiscing about their childhood. Each of them had brought their own families, spouses, children, and partners who had become part of the extended Carter clan. Lisa's daughter, a precocious 10-year-old, tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to do what you do," she said. "I want to help people." Lisa knelt to her daughter's level, her heart swelling with pride. "You already do, sweetheart, just by being kind." Bethany's twin sons darted around the room, sneaking extra cupcakes from the dessert table, while Janet's youngest son helped Ellie's daughter practice a few lines from a school play. Mary's teenage daughter had spent the evening talking with guests about her plans to join the police academy, just like her mother. Watching their children play and dream together, the sisters realized how much their own journey had shaped the next generation. Thomas's speech. Toward the end of the evening, the room grew quiet as Thomas took the stage. He looked out at the sea of faces, many of them familiar, others new, and took a deep breath. "When Emily and I decided to foster these 5 incredible girls, we didn't know what we were getting into," he began, his voice steady but emotional. We didn't know how hard it would be or how much we would learn from them. But what we did know was that every child deserves a chance to thrive, to be loved, and to feel like they belong. He paused, glancing at the sisters, who were sitting together in the front row. Lisa, Bethany, Janet, Mary, Ellie, you've given us more than we ever could have given you. You've turned our house into a home and our lives into something extraordinary. We're so proud of you. The room erupted in applause, and Thomas stepped down from the stage, pulling his daughters into a tight hug. The final moment. As the celebration wound down, the family gathered outside under a canopy of stars. The sisters stood side by side, their arms around each other, looking up at the night sky. "It feels like everything has come full circle," Lisa said softly. Emily smiled. "It has. But it's also just the beginning. Your legacies are just starting." Thomas nodded. "You've shown the world what's possible when love is stronger than fear, and that's something that will last forever." The sisters stood in silence for a moment, their hearts full. Then Ellie, ever the performer, grinned and said, "So, what's next?" Lisa laughed, Bethany rolled her eyes, and Janet playfully nudged Ellie's shoulder. Together, they walked back into the gym, ready to face whatever the future held. Together.